Throughout church history, some have traditionally referred to Wednesday of Holy Week as Spy Wednesday, because it's the day that Judas, one of Jesus' 12 apostles, betrayed his Lord. After Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and his dramatic cleansing of the temple on Monday, and all of the scathing words he had to say about the Jewish religious leaders in the temple on Tuesday, the Pharisees had it. The day before, they contemplated how they might arrest Jesus, but didn't think that it would be prudent to do this with the increased popularity of the crowds in Jerusalem. On Wednesday, the plan got more specific though. They decided that they would arrest him after the Passover festival ended a week after its beginning on Thursday. That way, the crowd will have dissipated tremendously. With all the pilgrims going back home, he had to be dealt with, but they couldn't afford a riot. Did they want to wait a week? No. But what else could they do? Well, as Wednesday progressed, an unexpected ace was slipped into their hand, and his name was Judas. In Luke 22, verse 3, it says that Satan entered Judas. While we have seen Satan's minions at work throughout the ministry of Jesus, this is the first time that we've seen Satan himself on the scene since he tempted Jesus in the desert back at the beginning of his ministry in Luke chapter 4. Do I know exactly what it means that Satan entered Judas? No, I don't. Did he possess Judas? Maybe. I'm not sure. But here's what I know. At a minimum, Satan influenced and encouraged Judas's betraying actions in a supernatural way. In John 13, verse 2, it says that the devil prompted Judas to betray Jesus. Now, keep in mind, this is a man who left everything to follow Jesus. This is a man that put his life on the line because he believed that Jesus had changed his life, that he was the Son of God and the Messiah. This was not a faithless man. For 3 years, this man had faith that we could all look at and envy. The question is, what brings a man like Judas to be vulnerable to being prompted by Satan to betray Jesus? Well, we know that Judas was the treasurer. He was in charge of handling the money. And we know that when Mary of Bethany, in his mind, recklessly poured the immensely expensive bottle of perfume on Jesus' feet, he was set off by it. He thought it should be sold and the proceeds given to the poor. Now, I'm not picking on Judas, but this is a sign that he didn't quite understand the worth of Jesus in that moment and the glorification that Jesus was about to experience. But here's what I really think happened on that Wednesday. Jesus had told Judas and the rest of the disciples that he was the Son of God and that he was the Messiah. But he also told them on numerous occasions that he was going to Jerusalem to die. It seems as if that message went right in one ear and out the other side for most of the disciples. Even during Holy Week, we see that they hadn't grasped the reality and truth of Jesus' words. But something tells me that when Judas saw that what he did in the temple on Monday and the words that Jesus spoke on Tuesday, he knew that Jesus fully did intend to die. You could take this two ways. Maybe Judas became convinced that Jesus was going to willingly let himself be killed, and at that point, Jesus had betrayed Judas's idea of what the needed king and Messiah should be. Or you could say that Judas tried to get Jesus arrested to force his hand to act in a revolutionary way, supernaturally bringing down the kingdom by force. Either way you slice it, I think Judas made this move because it had become apparent that the mission of Jesus did not line up with the mission of Judas. A Jesus that would die didn't line up with the king that he thought that he needed. Judas falls prey in this moment of betrayal of thinking that he knows better than God. In Holy Week, it can be easy to look upon Judas in such a condemning and judgmental way. Like, how could he? After all Jesus had done for him, after all he'd seen Jesus do, let's face it, we're no different than Judas on any given day. The cross of Jesus was a stumbling block for Judas. That kind of grace and mercy just didn't compute in his mind. And even if you're a follower of Jesus watching this, know this: anytime that we choose our way instead of Jesus' way, we are betraying our Lord just like Judas. When the cross of Christ tells us to lay down our lives for the sake of others, yet we preserve ourselves. When the cross of Christ says to forgive, and we choose to hold that grudge. When the cross of Christ says to show mercy, yet we enact revenge. When the cross of Christ says to love, and we still choose to hate. When we do these things on a daily basis, we are saying that we wish we could make Jesus in our image instead of realizing that we were created to be in his image. When we do these things like Judas, we are putting ourselves in a position that is vulnerable to be prompted by Satan. So on this day, Wednesday of Holy Week, let me challenge you. Instead of just reading a story about Judas betraying Jesus and you feeling lucky that you don't have to be in his shoes, know this: It was the sin of Judas that nailed Jesus to the cross, but it was also your sin and my sin. And any sin that we choose over the holiness of Jesus is a betrayal of Jesus himself. And so I ask you on this day to do something uncomfortable and to not read the story of Judas just from a point of view of judgment. I want you to read the story of Judas and to hear the story today and say, how today am I putting myself in a position that's vulnerable to being prompted by Satan himself? And what makes you vulnerable is when you try to make the Messiah, when you try to make Jesus the King, your own version of the King, instead of accepting Jesus for the King that he actually is. Thank you so much for joining us today on Wednesday of Holy Week. Make sure to join us again tomorrow to check out the video to see what happened on what has traditionally been called Maundy Thursday. Again, don't just take my word for it. Go look down in the description of this video to see the different Bible passages that I'm covering and summarizing on this day and read them for yourself. See you tomorrow.